Welcome to the database security session. So this is on MySQL database security. Mostly we'll talk about the tips and tricks and mostly practical applications like what settings to change, where to change, and what applications to use. So this is brief intro about me. I'm Naresh. I lead the engineering teams at at Meta. I worked in the past on Oracle and CSC, DXC. That's my LinkedIn if you're interested to connect. So now coming to the database security as in general security, why this became so important. So if you see, this is a very latest survey of CrowdStrike in 2024. There is an increase in 76% in data theft and 60% in intrusions and 75% in cloud intrusions especially. So this tells the story that no systems are safe. Every year the theft and data security and the risk of security in the world is evolving, and the cloud intrusions jumped to 75% as compared to 2023. This is a latest report from CrowdStrike basically. So what changed in the, so I'll be talking in general about database world. So what is the major change in the shift in the security in the database world? So historically, we were all in the impression running any mission critical database, I'm talking about Oracle, SQL Server or MySQL, any database in general, we have a tendency that anything within the VPN we used to consider as a secure on-prem databases world. But that's no longer true even for on-prem or a cloud. So now everything is cloud first, where everything is, all the workloads and databases are moving into cloud. That statement is no longer true. And even in the on-prem world, there is a more emphasis on, if you see, the zero trust security. So basically what zero trust security is saying us is that do not trust network. Even someone is in the VPN or within the network doesn't give them a free pass. And do not trust people. Every time identity has to be established, and we need to validate the connection, and we need to validate who is the person and where they are coming from. So this is a new change, or the world evolved into a more security first approach, where the focus is on every time someone has connecting to a database system, they have to make sure that security is not compromised, and every time they have to make sure that the person or application is connecting to the database is verified and allowed. There is no exception whether internal or external. So in specific to database world, what are the major attacks we have today? So why we see increased threats on the database? So if you see the general classification on the database world, even today the attacks are similar. We have SQL injections, buffer overflow, brute force, and malware and insider abuse. So all of this inconceptually can be mitigated if you have a right tooling and right practices in place. Practices in terms of patching security, patching systems periodically, making sure operating systems are hardened, following the best practices of the product to make sure that we have latest code, no vulnerabilities on the code and also systems. So most of these vulnerabilities in today's session we are going to discuss, and most of them can be avoided or identified before the attack happens. So in general, in MySQL world, if we are talking about today, if we are evolving into the security journey, where to focus, like what should we take care as a security aspect, and which are all the areas we need to fix. So if you take generally in a very high level, I see there are 4 areas to focus if you are actually interested in making your databases secure. So the configuration part, encryption, authentication, and firewall. We'll talk more detail in each item, but in general configuration, we are talking about making sure your database configuration is security aware, like every parameter and everything you are doing actually is in line with what is your security posture or what security you want in that particular database. Encryption. Nowadays, TDE or DARE or encryption in transit and encryption at rest is becoming a very common standard. There is no exception. In this modern world of cloud, most databases comes TDE as a default, and encryption in TLS or SSL encryption is becoming a mandatory thing. Authentication. So MySQL has a lot of authentication plugins now from version 8. I will talk more detail, like there are a lot of options to use. So the native authentication, just depending on a native MySQL authentication, is no longer going to work in the modern world. And we have firewall and auditing. These are all enterprise versions. but they are very robust in terms of SQL injections and identifying the patterns, identifying and defending the databases against attacks. These are all very powerful tools. So if we start this journey today, okay, we need to harden the database. Like, what are all the areas we need to concentrate? So if we are doing the first time, start from the installation and making sure that your installation is secure. So there are a lot of tools, CLI tools are available today, which helps us making sure the installation itself is secure without having any vulnerabilities in the database. And configuration, we all know that configuration file, there is a lot of variables which you can set to make your database secure. And the next thing is authentication. We'll talk detail on authentication plugins and authentication modules, but there are a lot of authentication options available based on the infrastructure or the security posture we are looking for. So this is a most easy thing to catch if you are looking like, okay, how do I make my database more secure than what I have today? The easiest option is, okay, make your database installation secure first. Okay, change the default root password, remove anonymous users, remove the test databases, set password complexity, restricting privileged user accounts, and disable remote access for root users. So these are all very easy to do, but they are very powerful in real-time world, which actually improves your security posture immediately. This is easy thing to do, but this has a greater impact. And now this is where this particular thing, I put it in the installation, but this is in general the maintenance. So the biggest problem in database world is like, okay, we have deployed a new database or a new workload, which is a financials or anything mission critical. Okay, we do that first time very good. Okay, we review the database security, we install everything and all. But as we evolve, there is a lot of legacy settings, and we never take care of upgrading the database versions. Okay, and we never do the operating system upgrades in line with the database versions. So the problem what happens is most organizations, if you see, they are still running in the older versions of the software and also the operating systems. The cost of running older versions is not only the functional part, there is also security implication. If you are running older version of operating system, there is a buffer overflows, a lot of bugs involved in that, which actually impacts your database. So that weakens your database security. At the same time, if you don't upgrade your database software, you are running in a legacy versions, and again, you are prone to a lot of security attacks and security vulnerabilities in the system. That is also a major flaw, and this is the reason I kept in installation is this is something has to be managed forever, like running how you are running database backups and recoveries and all your mechanisms. Upgrading operating systems and database software is also one of the most important factor in mitigating the security risks. Now, we have discussed about installation. There are a lot of options, like change the root password, change a lot of stuff and everything. If you're not someone who wants to do that manually, with the latest version of MySQL 8 and above, you have this secure CLI, which takes care of a lot of stuff. Just run this after installation. It asks you a lot of prompts. It does everything we have talked about, like changing the passwords, making sure that test accounts are dropped, removing the anonymous users, all these things it will take care. This is a very easy tool to run on once you install the database, but it does a lot of things which takes care of someone having going manually validating all of them. This tool takes care. So this is a secure installation of CLI, just use that. And one more important thing, so this is something, if you're running a SOX databases, you would see this is very important thing. But if you're running a non-SOX or non-financial databases, no one really cares, frankly. In SOX world, this is something they always insist compliance and SOX that, okay, the password policy needs to be set. You need to have a certain number of characters, password expiration, not reuse the password, all these kind of 4 items or 3 items we have discussed. But the major flaw in a regular world is that we don't see this as a security requirement. We see this as a compliance requirement. That is a major difference. So if you see this as a security requirement, if someone is trying to do a brute force attack, having a password policy immediately locks that user if they try for more than 3 times. That is very simple to implement, but it has a very, very practical mitigation on someone trying to do brute force attack on your database. But usually we as a database engineers, we take these things lightly, but they have a very huge cost. So if you are implementing a database and you wanted to improve your security, this is easiest. Implement a strong password management policy which meets your organization requirement. Also, it covers the security aspect of it. So DARE, or data encryption at rest. So this is something we are happy that every organization now thinks that TDE or DARE is a minimum requirement. If you're running the database in any cloud, it is offered by free. There's no more service license, or in MySQL world or any other databases, TDE is becoming a common practice. That's a good thing. But on-prem customers, if you're running MySQL on-prem, make sure that you implement TDE. It is available from very 5.7 to now. I mean, any version it is available. So basically, you are encrypting your data files on disk. So if someone steals the disk or disk gets compromised, your data is not compromised. You are protecting with a master key. There is a two master key for database and master key for the table spaces, encryption keys. So we'll see a snippet of how these parameters are set. But in general, TDE is easy to set up in MySQL world, and it is very much important and very much required. Please do this. So these are all the very simple parameters. We have a key ring, and you have to set up a key ring with a file, and end of the day, it will show default table space encryption to on. These are all the two major parameters. I'm not going to talk about all the steps needs to be done, but basically these parameters defines if you have a TDE enabled on not in your MySQL world. Okay, this is our encryption in transit. Everyone knows SSL and TLS requirements. Everything coming from client to database needs to be encrypted. But unfortunately, this is a lot of systems I see, this is somehow was not treated as an important thing if you are running in your own world, like your own network. Unless the application or client is external, internally we think that the client to server or application to database is okay to go with a plain text. But the problem is this clearly exposes your data and every secret and everything. So setting up SSL or TLS is very easy, and just by setting these parameters, you are good to go. So basically the required secure transport on is the one which actually determines that any connections to your database should be using a TLS or SSL protocol. Then you need a certificate on the client side, and you need to generate a certificate and use in your MySQL my.cnf file, and you pass the same certificates to your client so that clients can make a connection to using the certificate. And it also works as an authentication method. You can use an SSL authentication, like you no need to provide a user, you can use this for an authentication also. But this is very, very critical, implementing TLS and SSL on database world. So this is a MySQL backup. So this is a very, I would say backups are least considered in a security world. We never think that, hey, backup also has actual data. So if I'm actually worried about my database being secure, my backup should always secure. But somehow only live databases are given all the priority, but when we take the backup copies, there is no much emphasis on a security. We just think it's okay to take a backup and send it to some storage and never actually take care of it. But this does two things. In this example, we are talking about login path. This is not directly related to the backups, but the reason I have kept it is that if you use MySQL config editor, one of the MySQL tool, basically it allows you to set a login path where you can actually provide your username and passwords and encrypt that password file. So basically whenever you're using like MySQL dump or any utility, instead of giving the password and username manually, you can just use this file, which this way you're not exposing your credentials in any scripts. Usually we have a tendency for all the backups and everything, we use shell scripts and we hard code all those passwords in the shell scripts. So this avoids that particular requirement. You can use this login file and you can take a backup so that you're not actually storing the passwords anywhere directly. And we will talk about the dump. And the next part is using the MySQL dump. How do I encrypt actually my backup? Here we are just using a OpenSSL to generate an encryption key. Using that key, we are actually taking the backup here. So I'm sending all my database backup using an encryption key and dumping it in a particular file. So that encryption key is required to restore the database. So this way your databases are lying around. The problem is unless you have a very strong purging policy or a very auditing policy, backups can be anywhere. We have a tendency before any maintenance or anything, we just run a backup and just leave it there. It is lying somewhere in the disks or someone's laptop, but there is no control or there is no auditing on what backups we are taking. So the best is that if you don't know, just use this so that just like that, no one can actually read those backup copies. And coming to the one more interesting feature, enterprise firewall. This is available in the enterprise version. So wherever you see enterprise, it is not in commercial version. Community version. It is basically enterprise version. You need to have a license from MySQL. So this is an interesting tool which is very beneficial if you're worried about any attacks in terms of SQL injections or unauthorized access to a database, and you wanted to have, for example, this works in such a way, it has different modes. So once you install the plugin, and the next slide will talk about the plugin. Once you install the plugin and you start observing the database, by default it is off, but once you install plugin, you have an option to record. You don't need to do anything. You wanted to just see, hey, what actually happens on my database day to day, who connects, what activities they are doing. So whenever you do that, it will actually log all this information in the firewall whitelist table, so you can see what is actually happening on my database. If you think that, okay, you have recorded everything and you know all the statements in your database, then go ahead and use the protection mode. Protecting mode means that anything other than these whitelisted statements, if you're fired against database, that will reject actually. So this has to be a little bit of careful, that we don't want to reject queries which are ad hoc in the nature or application changes the pattern. That can backfire you. So you have to be sure on recording for a long time to know your query patterns or what actually executes on database. Once we know that, then you can use a protection mode. The next one is detecting. The detecting is interesting. It doesn't actually deny anything happens. For example, you have a query which is not in the whitelisting table, but you wanted to know if anything changes. Those kind of scenario, you can just set it to detecting. Anything not matching, it will just fire write in a log instead of rejecting that query, so that you know before you taking a drastic decision to reject, you will have what query being executed outside of your pattern. So this detecting works. For example, you upgraded your application tomorrow, but you don't know in live production upgrade, you don't know what queries will change in your upgrade, right? In that kind of situation, changing it to detecting help you to not completely taking away the protection, but at the same time, anything new, you will know these are all the queries being executed now. How do we set up this? Very simple. So just there is a firewall plugin. You download it from the MySQL site and install the plugin and create the whichever the mode you wanted. You can just set up that. I have set up in the recording, so that's what you see here. I'm running in the recording mode, so everything records. No action is taken here. And now coming to the audit. So audit, enterprise audit, as the term says, this is also enterprise tool, not freeware, like not a community version, it's an enterprise one. So basically the enterprise audit works in such a way that you have you have installed the plugin and you actually specify your audit log, what is the method and everything. So everything happening in the database writes into the audit log. So audit log is a choice. Like if I'm running a very mission critical database, I wanted to know what is happening in the database. That is something we can enable, and there is a requirement from some audit compliance purpose. You can set up this so that you will have an audit log. But interesting thing with this is how it looks like. If you are looking how the audit log looks like, it says that what is the queries being executed, what is the time, who connected, what mission, everything. Like if I created a table or if I created anything will be logged. It's like every activity being logged. The problem with these kind of audit tools are that it is too much verbose. Like if you, unless you know that I need this particular purpose, enabling this might be like you'll have tons of audit logs files generated. But in the latest version of the MySQL, this is disabled by default. Even if you enable the plugin, it is disabled by default. I think maybe the reason could be people enabled it without understanding what would be the implication. So even if you install the plugin, it is disabled. We have to enable, or you have to use a specific command to say which user you are enabling it, so that it doesn't become like a database wide by default enabling an audit log. So the next one is role-based access control. So if you're ever using a GDPR compliance, this is a very big thing for them. Like having a database or RBAC is a major thing for them. So it is very simple. This concept exists in most of the databases. You create a role, and instead of creating you giving a user directly privileges, we are creating a role and giving all the grants to the role, and you assign the role to a particular user. Very simple. So this is very important, because anytime I wanted to change a particular privilege, instead of changing on individual user level, I'm changing on the role level. So that means if I take out from sales admin, if I take out delete, immediately every user who has this privilege will be taken out. That is the beauty of it, and it's a GDPR requirement. And RBAC is a very prominent now. Every application, databases, everywhere RBAC is being used. So we have, this is the one topic I wanted to talk, like authentication with MySQL. We have a lot of authentication methods in MySQL. Now it's supported. Like we can use LDAP, we can use cert based, we can use legacy, and we have other options like Windows authentication and SASL or PAM, which is pluggable authentication. So these are all available. In the interest of time, I'll just go a little bit fast. So the native authentication, everyone knows now. MySQL 8 supports only caching to SHA-2 password. That is a default authentication method. If you don't specify anything, that is a authentication method it uses. And you just create with a normal. Even if you don't specify anything, it says caching SHA-2. If you specify, you can specify a different method. And LDAP authentication, we all know LDAP. Use my.cnf. You set up your LDAP server and your DN, like where to query the database and port, and you just enable the plugin. Make sure that once you do that and restart the MySQL, automatically your authentication LDAP simple will be active, and you can use LDAP authentication to create a user with that particular DN, and automatically LDAP will happen. And the very interesting thing is here it is 389, which is a non-SSL port. If you want an SSL, go for LDAP with SASL. This is an SSL configuration for your LDAP. Just the difference is that you are using an SSL port instead of non-SSL port. That's just anyway you use SSL or non-SSL, automatically both the plugins will be active, SASL and simple, and you just create the user. And this is an interesting one, PAM authentication, pluggable authentication modules, which comes with operating system. If you wanted to use operating system authentication and make an LDAP call by OS, not directly, this is a method. You just use the operating system LDAP config, which actually defines what is your LDAP config and everything. And on the LDAP file on the operating system, then you install authpam, which actually takes care of making a call to the operating system, and operating system makes a call to the actual data LDAP to authenticate, instead of directly using an LDAP authentication. So PAM supports a lot of modules, but this is the simplest with operating system. In the last one is that Windows authentication. So the Windows authentication, all you know that you just install a Windows authentication on the DLL file, and that takes care of setting up your plugin and activating, and you can use you can create a user with authentication of Windows. So essentially now MySQL supports all kind of authentication plugins. You can use LDAP or Windows or PAM or a native. So and cert based, if you are using cert based authentication, SSL. So based on your requirement, you can use it. This is an easy to implement, not so complicated, and you can just use this simple steps to implement it. So that's all.